live from Eaton Hotel in Hong Kong, and thank you firstly for being patient with us while we run a little bit behind schedule today. We are about 45 minutes behind, but we will make up for the time and we will keep you entertained so you won't even see it go by. But thank you for being patient and thank you for staying here with us. We have some very exciting content to share with you today because it is Fashion Revolution Week. And here in Hong Kong, many great things have been happening courtesy of two people sitting here with me, Kay Wong and Lauren Boucher, who are part of the Redress team and looking at very different aspects of what the NGO Redress does in Hong Kong. And Redress has been around for a while. It's a textile waste NGO, an environmental NGO focusing on textile waste. So very often when people think about fashion, they are like, ooh, the sexy, glamorous stuff. But you guys do a lot of the hard work behind the scenes, the stuff that people don't see. And we'll get into that a little bit more as we go on. But just to introduce who we are and what we're doing here, my name is Tanya Vessels. I am a content creator and I'm a writer. And I'm really curious about what drives us to do what we do. So looking at what drives human behavior. And I think that's a key to looking at how to engage change and create little satellites of action, because that's really what we need when we look at the changes that we make across the industries. And what's needed is our own participation. So I look at things like eco-anxiety, the psychology of fashion, all kinds of interesting things. Now, looking at the women I have sitting here next to me, I will do a very brief intro, but feel free to expand on your aspects. Kay, you've been leading as of this year the Fashion Revolution Hong Kong chapter, which is your first time. Tell us a little bit more about your background and what you've been seeing happening.
Okay, well, I've started my journey into sustainable fashion since maybe 2-3 years ago. So upon my return from Copenhagen, I started Fashion Clinic with Toby, and we work on repair, reshape, and redesign services for individual clients, as well as doing collaborations like upcycling projects for brands, NGOs. We do talks and workshops. So I guess we do have a slight kind of connection with Redress, like the way we see fashion. So I think I was just on this circular community WhatsApp and I saw Lauren post about the Fashion Revolution Hong Kong rep post, and that's how I just texted Lauren and said, maybe I can take over your role this year. So it's not been so long. It's only been like
a couple of days,
couple of weeks.
There you go. Because Lauren, you were the previous head of this experience in Hong Kong last year. Is that right?
Yeah. So I headed up Fashion Revolution Week in Hong Kong last year. This year, Kay taking over. Yeah, it's only been a couple of months, but Kay's done a phenomenal job, especially with everything that's going on with lockdowns and social distancing, to bring us so many exciting events this week online. And also really reaching a local Hong Kong audience, which we haven't in previous years, which has been fantastic, and running events in Cantonese. It's been great.
Yeah. So I'd like to interrupt here and perhaps maybe we can expand on what Fashion Revolution is. For those who don't know what this hashtag that they perhaps hopefully see across social media, what is Fashion Revolution and why is it important?
Would you like to? Because I find it difficult because it's a very big.
We can all expand a little bit. There's it's not a test.
I know.
My understanding of Fashion Revolution and my experience of it is it really was born of an unfortunate incident.
Yes.
Which happened 7 years ago in 2013 in Rana Plaza factory in Bangladesh, where the building collapsed and over 1,000 people lost their lives and many more were injured. And this really was a moment of global attention on the fashion industry. And there were a number of different brands working in that factory, a lot of different elements at stake. But it really was this moment to just say, we know it's not, the system is broken, but this is really a step too far. So this movement was born from that incident. And we sometimes think that Fashion Revolution is a week. It's not. The activity happens all year round. This particular week invites people to ask who made my clothes, to open up that conversation around what is the actual process of getting a garment from the soil to our wardrobes and beyond. So this is a call to action. And what I really love about Fashion Revolution is that it's very inclusive and it's very much action orientated. It's not theoretical, and it's very open. They give you all the tools you need to take action on your own. They give you the fonts, they give you the instructions, they give you the images, because this is an appeal to designers, to brand managers, to factory workers, to people who sew, to people who toil the land. This is everyone.
Something I just pick up on there is that Fashion Revolution is a global organization. So it happens in countries all around the world. I was seeing earlier this morning there were events yesterday in Guatemala, in South Africa, in New Zealand,
Singapore,
in
Japan.
Singapore and Philippines. Yeah, so
everywhere.
it's a global movement. It was started in the UK, but it's spread all around the world, and there's different offices in all parts of the world. So obviously, Kay is heading up the Hong Kong office, who all come together, and especially during Fashion Revolution Week, to ask these important questions. Who made our clothes being one of them, but also things like what's in our clothes.
Yeah. So I think for 2020, we've got 4 key areas we'd like to talk about. So conditions of the workers behind the fashion industry, composition of clothing. They were saying that 60% of our clothes is made of polyester, and it's actually plastic, and we're actually washing a lot of this microplastic into the sea. And then there is consumption, which is very serious a problem in Hong Kong, overconsumption of clothing. And then the last one is collective action. So that's more like setting up.
I think it's like workers' rights and unions.
Yes. Yeah. So
Isn't it interesting that in this moment in time, general public, fashion insiders and those beyond are really questioning, what are textiles made of? I mean, we've reached this point where there's so much information sharing that the average person today has a pretty good indication that there's a lot of plastic in the textiles that we wear every day. And to me, that's extraordinary, because I'm not in the fashion world, but I really look at things and I scrutinize them and I ask questions that 10 years ago wouldn't even have crossed people's minds. And there's so much more visibility into this, which is what Fashion Revolution is about. It's about transparency. It's not about blaming. It's about really... Fashion Revolution was started by people who love fashion.
Yes,
this was never
absolutely.
to be an attack or shaming. This was really people saying, we love fashion, it's broken. How can we get to love a fashion that serves everyone again? And I think that's really beautiful. And it's made me so much more aware. I just wanted to mention that this morning I read that Eaton Hotel staff have got sustainable clothing for their staff. The T-shirts are made by Cosmo Studio, which uses recycled plastic. And this just, Eaton, in addition to being one of the most progressive spaces, and thank you very much for having us this morning, and to James for all his help, but progressive people are really incorporating that and taking that on board. And we see a lot of really great stuff coming out of Hong Kong. What has been your experience with that?
Well, because I put together a Sustainable Fashion Festival last November at the Mills, we've kind of connected a lot with kind of sustainable innovators, material pioneers, designers, brands, putting all together. So Cosmos is one of the designers we worked with. And also for Fashion Revolution Week, this time I got in touch with 2 very amazing brands, Laces and...
I have a pair.
And Real Creed. So they both work with recycled or leftover leather scraps and then mixing it with recycled plastic to make their shoes. So everything is recycled, like down to every little detail. So I was very impressed. So we had them on our Facebook Live on Monday. That was just so good to learn about the whole process, how they actually do it, because sustainable practices often mean it's more expensive than the normal way of producing. So it's challenging, but then that's what they've like poured their heart into making it happen. So
addressing so many pain points that people who want to do these things but find that they can't, for all the obstacles that they have to overcome. And it's really pioneering and exciting to see how much we have in Hong Kong. And especially if your background is fashion design. You had a very successful brand for a long time. You had some of your work was shown in the Karl Lagerfeld shows, I believe, and you've won awards. So you underplay your skills somewhat, but I will not let you get away with that, because you've seen a lot of the glamour of creating beautiful clothing, and you really come from that side of things, which I always find interesting, talking to people in fashion, because like you worked at luxury fashion, you advised, you were on the legal side, you really very different sides of this conversation, and I often think that if we really knew what was behind fashion, we would be a lot more concerned. We see such a sanitized version of clothing when we walk into high street shops, and the light is right, and the clothing is impeccable, and the colors are appealing, and everything is tapping into our needs, our psychological, our emotional needs. But if you strip away all that glamour, there's a lot of pain and suffering that gets that garment to that point, and then from that point to where it eventually ends up. And I think, just to quote, and this is from the vegan movement, but Paul McCartney, when he said that abattoirs, if they had glass walls, people would think differently about eating meat. And I think if we understood more about where every piece of our clothing comes from, we'd be a lot more cautious about where we spend our time and energy. Do you agree with that?
I definitely agree. And I also think we would value what we had more. If we knew just the amount of human effort and time and craft that went into making our clothes, but actually into making a lot of the things that we use and consume every day that we don't really think about sort of who made them and what they're made of. If we knew more about that, and if we asked these questions that Fashion Revolution Week encourages us to ask, we would value our things more and be less likely to treat them as disposable, because actually that's where we've come to these days with fashion, is that it's so cheap and it's so prolific that a lot of us treat our clothes just as if they're a single plastic bag or a piece of paper. They're just a disposable item that we use and then we throw away.
I think that the problem, like one of the biggest problem, is that fast fashion is making it so cheap that people, not knowing about how it's being produced, thinks that, okay, it's just so cheap, like $20, it's so cheap that I should just buy it even if I won't wear it.
Because and that cost in no way reflects actually what's gone into it.
That's where the psychology is interesting, because it seems like a relatively innocent thing to do. I've definitely done it in the past before I became more curious. What's the harm? I buy this dress. What's the big deal? And I think that's where it's become so easy. It's become so fast that it feels harmless. Clothing doesn't hurt people. I'm not harming someone, but it's a system that's been so devised and backed and powered that we're doing this quite innocently. I have friends who tell me, and a little shout out to #Impact Podcast, because I heard a live interview with Christina Dean, founder of Redress, about 3 years ago, where she was talking about her experience of going to dumpsters and actually wearing the clothing from dumpsters. Really, and Christina Dean is somebody who is very aesthetically stylish and pleasing and wears things well. So whatever she could wear, people will believe. And here's the power of persuasion, right? Because if she can make something look cool, I became curious and I thought, what would happen if for 1 year I didn't buy any clothing? And I didn't. And it's been 3 years and I haven't bought new clothing. Amazing. And so much has changed in ways that I never thought possible. But this to ask that question about how much of this is really undoing what we've learned, and how do we get people to engage? My friends tell me, but I don't shop a lot. I only shop once a year. The point with fashion is that because if we don't have clothing, we will get arrested. It's illegal to walk around naked. We all have to have clothing. Consequently, and this is an invitation, we're all part of the fashion conversation. If you have clothing in your wardrobe, you're part of the fashion conversation. If you shop once a year, if you shop 100 times a day, it's a spectrum, different degrees, but we're still part of the conversation. Not to shame people, but to invite them into creative solutions. And I really feel that this is an opportunity to do that, right?
I think another way that we can kind of invite people to be part of it is pointing out that actually textiles are everywhere. Even if it's not the clothes on your body, it's your carpets, your cushions, your bed sheets, your towels. It's the same sort of production line that goes into making those textiles. And
just to talk to you a little bit, Lauren, I remember at the end of last year, during the Redress campaign to collect clothing, the clothing drive, where you invite companies and businesses and schools around Hong Kong to donate clothing at designated points in the public. So very straightforward process. You can leave your clothing in this box. We will collect it, sort it, and process it. And I was part of a public initiative with you guys where you're inviting volunteers to come and help sort out through how many tons of clothing was it?
We sorted through 15.4 tons of clothes
all
together in 24 hours. We had 420 volunteers helping us over that 24 hours. And it was
15 tons.
Incredible just to see that amount of clothes sitting in one big pile.
What kind of clothing is it? Was it?
This is all sorts of things. So we ran the drive, as Tanya said, it was about 120 companies, clubs and schools across Hong Kong took part in the clothing drive. and they were just encouraged to donate anything that they didn't want anymore. So any unwanted clothes. So we had men's, women's, children's.
It's a surprise.
We had,
you never knew what was going to come.
dirty socks and underwear, and we had beautiful luxury.
But you had
clothes.
laid
We
out
had
the
all
criteria. You
sorts.
did ask people, do not donate those things. But things slipped through the net, and it happened.
Inevitably, yes.
But by the same token, you would find absolute gems, and this is a testament to Hong Kong's shopping habits. You had high-end designer bags of relatively, if not completely unworn designer clothing that somebody was willing to put into an anonymous box in a public space, because as we know, there's not a lot of space in the city. People don't have a lot of capacity to hold on to things, and people are relatively shopping friendly. It's a pastime. So you will end up with these piles of clothing. And I think what happens in sustainability across the board is we get numbed by the numbers. We hear there are X number of this, there's this, and it doesn't sound good, but you can't really engage with it emotionally because it's an abstract.
Right.
With these kind of exercises, as far as the eye can see.
Yeah.
And that was just how many, that wasn't even a very long drive. It was like you collected over...
It was over 4 weeks in October.
Just not much.
Just in Hong Kong.
So I think I've done something similar with Women in Finance, and then at that point it was Friends of the Earth. They did a similar thing, and I helped sort out 3-4 tons of clothing, and that was just already a nightmare. It was...
It's funny when you say 4 tons, because I mean, what does that figure mean? You know, it's so hard to kind of imagine. You know, as Tanya said, like just what does that look like?
It was just a sea of boxes, and I had to climb over it as if it was a mountain. And someone took a photo of me on the top, and I was just all the dust and everything. But there was like a lot of good stuff in it.
Of course,
That
and
was
there's the
just
time
really
that it takes, and which is what you guys do. Completely devote your time to collecting those unwanted and giving them a new part in this cycle of fashion.
Yeah.
And I think the psychological, if you multiply those numbers visually, if you think that's 4 weeks and you do 12 weeks and it becomes so overwhelming that I found eco-anxiety to be something that would happen. I would get panicky. I'd get really scared about, my mind would be doing the math and imagining polar bears starving and the whole film playing out in front of me, and it would just really let me down a very dark space. But to go back to the cycle of fashion, tell us a little bit about, you're the head of circular fashion of the Circle Fashion Cycle at
Circular Fashion Program.
Thank you. I knew there was a right answer.
Fashion Program Manager. It's a lovely
It's a
long
mouthful.
title.
I'm glad you said it, because I was like, woo. So tell us a little bit about what does that mean, and what's the difference between that and a normal fashion cycle?
So Redress has 2 arms, really. I'm part of the Circular Fashion Program, but of course Redress's flagship project is the Redress Design Awards. So that's really working with designers like Kay to teach techniques like upcycling and to try and design out waste at the beginning. But the Circular Fashion Program, where I am, is really looking at that waste that's coming out of the fashion system and saying, well, what can we do with it? How can we put this back into use in some way? It's also about raising awareness in a big way of the problem. So it's about reaching out not to designers but to consumers, to brands, to corporates, to schools, to try and reduce the amount of waste that we're creating in the first place. But then to encourage people to think about what to do with things that they don't want, rather than to throw them in the bin. And textile waste rates in Hong Kong are just astronomical. It's 392 tons of textiles going to landfill every single day in Hong Kong. 50% of which is clothing, so that's about 200 tons every single day going to landfill
how much
in Hong
would
Kong.
that translate into in terms of visual, like buses?
Visually,
I don't know. Because I've seen someone talk about tons in terms of like, that's like how many buses packed with clothing or something.
We ran the figures last year when it was 370 tons every single day.
But that's clothing
of
or
textiles generally, and that was about 1.5 times the big Buddha.
Oh my god!
So if you can imagine the big Buddha
times
up on
the big
Lantau.
And so tell us, where does that go? What does it look like once you guys filter? Because you're
exactly. So where does it go? That's a brilliant question, and,
So
and
it goes
that's
into
really the
the-
challenge of circularity, is trying to bring all of those resources back into the loop so that they can be used at the very beginning when designers are sourcing materials. ultimately the idea is that they could use those materials at end of life and bring them back into the chain.
So correct me if I'm wrong, is it 80% of the design process dictates the end of the life of the garment? So within that...
It's 80% determines the garment's overall sustainability, and that does take into account end of life. So 80%, of a garment's sustainability is locked in at that design stage.
Right.
So that's questions around like what fibers do you source? Are you sourcing organic cotton or recycled polyester or polyester? And then looking at the impact of that sourcing and your overall design, whether you're using zero waste patterns or creating a lot of waste in the pattern making stage.
Right.
And looking at the impact of that over the life cycle, about 80% is locked in at that stage.
Which is why education is so important. Working with designers to think ahead before we're doing all this catch-up at the end. And really helping them to think along ways that will be more regenerative, right? Rather than just linear where it is take, make, throw away. And understanding that everything has value. And it's a financial question as well. You are throwing away money when you're constantly ditching old jeans, when you're constantly, these things can relive and find a new output. So that's the whole circular concept where we keep things in this loop. And you keep it in the loop as long as you can. And that's not just only in fashion, it can be from fashion to agriculture, vice versa. It can be different industries taking from each other. Textiles is such a huge thing. It taps into car seats, curtains, upholstery. It's endless, but unless we start thinking systematically about what will happen with this at the end of its life, and really think through that a little bit more holistically, we're going to keep on having overlaps and missed opportunities within industries, right?
But that absolutely needs to be taken into account at the design stage, because what we're finding at the moment when we in our drive towards a circular system for fashion is that a lot of the textiles that are being created aren't able to be recycled at the end of their lives. And there's a lot of work to do sort of developing and financing the technology that goes into that. But there's also a lot of education work to do with, educating designers about what can and can't be recycled. Very simple things like I was reading in the Ellen MacArthur jeans redesign guidelines about how various parts of our jeans aren't recyclable. For example, the seams, the buttons, the zips, of course. So when you take a pair of jeans to get recycled, all of that needs to be cut away. And basically you're just cutting off the whole top part of the jeans that includes the back pockets and the top with all the fastenings. I think just a very small percentage of it can be recycled, but if we designed it differently, we could recover a lot more.
So this particular point, when you talk about the jeans, I think... I don't know how to pronounce exactly, but Freitag or Freitag?
Oh yeah, Freitag.
They've designed a pair of jeans that's completely compostable. So they've designed the rivets, the pockets, and the zippers. Everything can be just like unscrewed, and then you can just put it in the compost bin, and it's just gonna. So
denim is one of the most resource-intensive items in our wardrobes. Is that right? From the dyeing to the cotton to the effects that they make on the different sandblasting, etc. It's a very, very resource-intense garment. Correct?
Yes.
And this might be yes, you got it right. This might be a good time to talk about the difference between upcycling, recycling, and downcycling, because I think there might be, and that's really your area, Kay. Take it away.
So I've been using kind of this upcycling approach since I started off in my career. Just when I design, it's actually very economical to kind of turn an old shirt into a new design. So this has always been kind of my design approach. I like unpicking things. I'm not great at doing paper patterns myself, so it's easier for me to unpick things and put things together back again. And often by doing so, I create new forms, from putting two shirts together, pulling the sleeve away or making the sleeve the collar. So it's just a very fun, creative process, this upcycling, like giving more value to an old garment. Recycling is reusing material to how should I define recycling?
It's basically turning fibers back into fibers again.
Yes, fibers back into fibers. And downcycling is probably making... Oh, do you want to?
No, you can go.
You can have it, Kay.
No, sometimes I find it difficult to say it's downcycling, because even if you turned not so good fabric into blankets, they call it downcycling, right? I don't really see it as down. So, but that's how people define.
The value is less than, it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
the
it's
very
definitely
simple kind of explanation is that upcycling would increase the value, and that downcycling is turning it into a low value product like insulation for car seats.
But keeping it in the cycle, right?
Rags.
Right.
Keeping it out of landfill, basically.
Keeping it out of landfill, yes. But I suppose the question is, you know, say you downcycle something into stuffing, what happens next? You know, does it then go to landfill? You're extending its life, but is it ultimately then being discarded rather than brought back into the loop?
Which is where the technology comes, with really looking at regenerative materials and a lot of bio-organic, compostable, regenerative. So there's interesting technology in action. However, in terms of a meaningful time frame, I guess that's the challenge that everybody faces, and even optimists are aware that, you know, we do have certain challenges. How do we get there faster? How do we scale? And how do we address the two really painful points, which is convenience and cost? You can't expect the consumer to constantly be making those decisions, to go out of their ways to be the better person with virtue signaling and to really go out of their way in terms of expense and energy. I think it's up to the systems to really provide those services. And I think everybody's in agreement with that. It's just a question of what are the incentives, how are we going to get there, how fast, and who's going to take the lead. I think most brands and companies are aware that changes are afoot. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're all ready to take the lead. Go or be dragged, I think, is to some extent the philosophy. But that is an understanding that we all have. So that price point and convenience challenge. And Kay, with you, what's interesting is that you truly are, and you call yourself the green artivist.
You know everything.
I know everything. But it's, and I've seen your work, and that concept of really no waste is across the board for you. It's not just as a profession. You make fine art out of found pieces, and you compose them in a really sorry, and it's not too
I think this has to rewind a bit back to my fashion label days. At that point, I really just kind of kept my head in the sand like an ostrich. Like, I didn't want to, I knew there were problems in the fashion industry, but I just kind of like, I don't want to know about it. And it was also a very busy life, so I just had to keep chasing the seasons all the time. So when I had the chance to close the brand, close the studio, I was just like super relieved, but also horrified by how much stuff we've accumulated over 10 years. It's not just the dead stock we've accumulated. It's just raw materials, it's buttons, trimmings, chains, all the bits and bobs. We had to rent 3 kind of mini storage rooms to put everything in. And even so, there was a lot of stuff we couldn't keep. So when I went to Copenhagen, I worked for another designer, and what was more horrific was he was an idol to me. Like, I loved his work, and he did amazing catwalk exhibition installation.
Can you share his name?
Henrik Vipskov. And one of the first tasks he gave me was like, "Kay, can you help me sort out the warehouse?" And because he did these amazing installations every season, so his warehouse was like 20 times bigger than mine.
Pimped up.
So I had to help him sort through his stuff as well. I was just like thinking, God, this fashion industry is sick. I mean, we create so much stuff every season, and is it necessary to do this every season? So that was, I think, the start of having conversations with designers. Like, I think designers in Scandinavia, Eastern Europe, they have this mentality kind of inborn. They think of the environment a lot. So we had a lot of conversations, and that was also the year that I also tried this 1 year of not buying new clothes, and that was just very refreshing, because I brought my suitcase of clothes that I needed, and it was just amazing not to have that many choices. It was so much lighter. So that was the kind of the changing point, and that was also when I decided just looking at all the documentaries, the true cost and all that, I decided to set myself a rule, like to not use any more new virgin material. So that was how the Green Artivist came about, like just setting this rule. And that's how also Fashion Clinic worked and all my other freelance jobs, like not using any new material.
So psychologically that's so interesting, because one makes these challenges like, this rule is for me and I'm going to abide by this, and we don't always understand the implications that comes over time psychologically. And I think tapping into now what the world is seeing with COVID-19 and this lockdown, and we're really being pulled out of our routines for whatever reasons. If you were a gym bunny, you can maybe no longer be a gym bunny right now. If you were a shopaholic and you'd love going into shops and touching textiles and feeling things, you can't do that in shops right now. You can probably do it online. So a lot of things are being challenged for us right now on a scale that I don't believe we've ever seen. So when we have these things taken, and this is a little bit of something we were talking about before, is our identities and our sense of self and the discomfort with a life without distractions. And where I'm going with this is that I think very often many of us shop because we're bored, because it's fun, because it's there, because we overeat, we over-exercise, we do a whole bunch of things to extremes to perhaps take us out of the moment. And I think now with this situation, we're perhaps seeing an invitation to be a little bit more present with different realities, and where will that go? And how much of this is just trying to run away from ourselves? So when I hear people being shopaholics, I do wonder, like, it is fun to a certain point, and there is value in shopping. However, at what point does that become your sense of self, or something that you just do as opposed to being intentional about it?
Right.
And and I found that when I stopped buying clothing, I have so much more energy for other ideas.
Exactly.
That point of decision making all the time is kind of gone, because I've narrowed my options so much that 80% of what's around me I don't even look at, let alone spend time debating it. But that of course opens up a whole bunch of other things, but that's a different story. But this kind of stepping out of your comfort zone, or being invited to think about things differently, how much of us are just running away from ourselves with this endless consumption?
That's true.
And we were talking also about revenge shopping,
that's
which
horrible.
we have a lot of optimism around this new dynamic where people are just really questioning what's really important, what isn't, and financially the belts being tightened. There are a lot of forcing functions making people behave as they haven't before. Now, for the sustainability people, we're very excited about this, because we keep on thinking, yay, good things can come out of this. But on the other hand, when we step out of our bubble, what's happening on the other side? Where do you see this going? Can you talk us a little bit through what you think possible outcomes could be from this change in our routine?
I mean, looking at the economy, I suppose, not on a personal level, but we've seen a huge decline in foot traffic to retail stores, declines online as well. Across the board, all businesses, but especially in fashion. So fashion's been particularly hard hit because it's a discretionary good, right? We do need to wear clothes, but we don't need as many clothes as we have. And experts are predicting that that's going to be a long term, that this is going to stick around for a while. There's significant effect to our economy of this lockdown period, and people are feeling a little bit kind of anxious about their financial security as well, and less willing to spend. So I mean, at the moment, that sort of decline in consumption has come very much for practical reasons, foot traffic, but also financial reasons. But there is potential that this is going to tie in with a wider sentiment that we have been seeing over the last couple of years. So experts have sort of noted, trend forecasting experts have noted that sustainability is picking up momentum. So people are more aware of environmental problems and social problems in the fashion industry. They're aware of overconsumption, of irresponsible business practices, and they are starting to demand change at a small scale. But it's possible that this time of reflection, and that this time when we've been forced to stop, that those conversations are going to be sharpened, and that those kind of those opinions are going to be sharpened, and sustainability is really going to be brought into the spotlight and become an even bigger consideration for consumers when life does eventually return back to a new normal.
A new normal, that's right. Lots of brands will unfold, do you believe? I mean, is that just inevitable that we're going to see a lot of perhaps superfluous brands or fashion or cycles? Or there was talk about, do we need that many fashion cycles? There was already talk before this that it needs to slow down. Having so many seasons, so many shows, so many, it was just stressing everyone out. Could this perhaps really be a kind of a reflection point where we say, is this really necessary? Because I think everybody's getting...
I think a lot of designers have been asking this question.
How many seasons are there? Like fashion seasons?
They say 52. I
but
don't know whether
that's fashion. That's Zara, I think.
At least 52
horrible.
Sort of new drops.
Yeah,
There's at
new
least
drops.
a new drop a week.
Or capsule
a
collections.
Week.
Yeah.
I think a lot of brands have ended up with a huge amount of overstock at the moment, and so that might be the catalyst for reducing the number of seasons.
So what's going to happen with those out of fashion things now that have been lying around in storerooms for weeks now? They're very passé. They're very last month. So what happens with that?
So possibly bargain sales is...
being burnt as we...
Very possibly, yeah. Across the world, there'll be landfilling and incineration because of this. I mean, of course, it's appalling, and that's not the system we want to be part of. But there really is globally a struggle for solutions of what to do with just all of this stuff that we've created. You know,
and also resources running out. How much more cotton will there be? How much any natural resource will there be? These things are not guaranteed. So there's so many points to reflect for the industry to really see how do we move this forward, and where are we with this complete crazy cheap bikinis for $1 and you know, at a click of a button you can have a whole wardrobe. If you don't like it, send it back.
They have also... Oh, sorry, Kay.
I was just going to say that I can totally feel that the mentality or people's habits is shifting. So the fashion revolution alternative, I think, is really cool. Like, have you seen the... so it's an alternative to fashion haul.
Oh, no, tell me.
Fashion hauling.
So you know what a fashion haul is?
When you go and buy large numbers of items and just overbuy?
But then you get on YouTube because you're an influencer.
Oh,
and
no,
you hold up and show everyone what you've bought today. I bought this t-shirt and this skirt.
Yeah, I see where this is going.
It's the Fashion Revolution team in London. They came up with a alternative guide. So it's a lot of like doing up your wardrobe, like organizing your wardrobe, buying secondhand, renting clothes, repairing, DIYing, there's many more, but it's just really a really fun guide.
That is fantastic, because I think a lot of sometimes when people talk sustainable fashion, there's a lot of no's. Don't do this, don't do that. What about the yeses? What about the opportunities to keep on enjoying fashion but do it in a better way? And with this, I want to talk about a little bit more about what you're talking about, the renting, decluttering, all this kind of stuff. And this is a good time with the Marie Kondo, with like how to minimize your life, how to get rid of that psychological stress that you have of having so much stuff that needs looking after, the mold, the ironing, the packing. Hong Kong has a number of good solutions, and one that comes to my mind is a company called Pact, where they basically take the pain out of storage, looking after your clothing, climate controlled, wardrobe on demand. You can so it's really all those things that are painful and annoying, like who really wants to go do that? They do that for you. So it's a really elegant solution to really deal with a lot of the problems around keeping a wardrobe in good condition, and also knowing what's in your wardrobe. I think a lot of people have things that they have forgotten about, and you might end up with like 6 black jumpers, and you realize that I'm a black jumper person, great, but how many do I need? Let's talk about other companies who are really innovating in Hong Kong and people who are doing great things.
I think in terms of secondhand clothing, there are a lot of shops I really like. I think Green Ladies is doing super well. I think the way they they treat the garments before they put it in the shop, you just feel safe that it's been cleaned properly, and they've got a nice selection, all color coordinated in the store. Then another few like cooler ones, it's Luddite. I don't know if you know, it's kind
No,
of
I've
in
not
a
heard of
secret
it.
corner on Haven Street in Causeway Bay.
What are they?
Secrets. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
It's
tell
really
us more
fashion
about
is
them.
But I think
yeah.
it's more like a guy. Like I mean, he makes his own line of clothing as well, but it's mainly secondhand. A lot of American, European style military wear, military bags. But it's really a nice, careful selection. And then 小时光, I think it's in Shangwan. It's more ladies' vintage wear. And then there's also Midwest, you know.
Kay's got all these secret places that I don't know.
It's
I was going to name some different brands, so this is very good for mine.
Can you tell me your selection? I mean,
You've got to give her the number that she's given you, so now you've got to give her
oh,
3.
maybe we should put together a list and I'll put
Absolutely.
it on Facebook.
Yeah,
And people can ask,
do.
you know, send in questions, ask. These are valuable resources we have here in terms of understanding the fashion
Yeah.
system
Mm.
and how to make things fun again and how to
I
make things
know.
enjoyable, because fashion is not meant to be punishment. It's not meant to
No.
be, it's so many different things, and the psychology of fashion to me is endlessly fascinating, not
Yeah.
because I necessarily am interested in brands, but I'm interested in why people do what they do. And
Yeah.
fashion really is a billboard. It's an advertisement, whether you know it or not. We're always signaling to people. We're always sending messages. We're always selling ourselves, and
Yeah.
not in a nasty way. It's just, if this is who I am to some extent. And
Yeah.
if we take away the kind of aspirational lifestyle, luxury branding that goes with certain aspects of that, but we really just say, I express myself through clothes. I enjoy clothes. It's color, it's texture, it's expression, it's fun, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And I miss that part of it, because it's just become such a disposable, dirty feeling nowadays for me.
Yeah.
And I want to get back into where it's fun and where we can do this in a healthy way. So what advice would you give people out there who are thinking of who don't necessarily want to go as extreme as saying, I'm going to stop buying clothing for X number, but what are sustainable brands that you recommend? Where should they start? What are the resources? What films? What books? Tell us a little bit about what floats your boat in these things.
I think if it's someone who's not really seen any of the documentaries, then the True Cost is like the must watch, because I think it's the most comprehensive documentary about what's happening all over, like in different kind of production parts of the fashion chain. So I think that's super important. And then after that, I'd suggest reorganizing your wardrobe, like take everything out and just revisit everything, because you've got stories and history and with a lot of your pieces. And I think a lot of times, or maybe most girls in Hong Kong have an exploded wardrobe.
Probably most girls worldwide.
Yeah. So it's just after reorganizing and making yourself able to see everything, you just stop buying or making the same repeat buys of the same
You
items
realize
you
you
think.
already have a lot.
Yeah.
And you've already got so much variety and so many things to wear.
Yeah. So, I mean, Maria Kondo is good because she has tips on how to help you reorganize your wardrobe, but I don't agree that, I mean, she always encourages people to just chuck everything away. I don't think that's the right way to go. I mean, I do think a minimalist approach to your wardrobe is good, but it's not about just, that doesn't solve the problem.
And it's
if you keep,
definitely not about dumping and replacing, which is
No.
a cycle that unfortunately is also
It's as they say,
encouraged
love
by
clothes
Marie Kondo.
last. The chances are that you've probably made some good fashion
Exactly.
decisions at some point in your life,
Yeah.
and don't discard that time and energy that you spent picking those garments. Perhaps just rethink it.
Yeah,
Give it another twist.
definitely.
You might think, everyone's seen me a million times this. Here's a little heads up. Most people don't think about other people very often. That's
true.
really, it's liberating. Don't see it as an insult. See it as,
Yeah.
Do you
It's-
honestly think you've seen me wear this before? Because I definitely have.
there you go. I mean, I hadn't noticed.
Yeah.
And I think that here's, the psychology. Let's question ourselves. Let's question why we do the things we do, because here's
Yeah.
an opportunity to get better at
Yeah.
doing things. And this is not just about fashion. This is about a whole bunch of things. But we
Definitely.
understand more about human behavior and our brains than we ever have, and we will continue to do that. So here's a real chance to get really good at being us, and that is something that I find very exciting. And fashion is
Yeah.
one of the many facets that expands to, because it's everyone. Like we said,
Yeah.
male, female, young, old, we all wear clothing. We are all part of the conversation. We are all part of the potential to change this
Yeah.
for everybody else who comes after us. yeah, it just, the idea that planet and people and animals and resources suffer for the relative wealth of a handful of people is absurd, and we encourage this. We perpetuate this cycle because we're psychologically supportive, we're emotionally, financially supportive. We keep these systems going. And at what cost to ourselves ultimately? If we're constantly being told this is the new trend, if you have, if you are overweight, wear this, if you're looking a bit spotty, use that. There's always a solution to whatever is lacking in you. And I really challenge this thinking, and I think particularly as girls, from a young age, from the moment we can read, we are signaled to that there's something missing. There's something that you can get, that you can be better about. And I really, as I get older, I really but hang on, this is nonsense. This is absolute nonsense. And we're aware of that. And I think a lot of today is about undoing things. Rather than doing and becoming more, is about undoing those layers of psychological conditioning and messaging from media and family and friends that we've been fed year after year. Even people who make good choices and decisions are mitigating the existing information to get to those better choices. You kind of have to step around it. And I think not buying fashion for a whole bunch of years has really helped me understand how this all works. And not wanting to be part of that loop, that endless loop that has no satisfaction. It just goes on and on. 52 cycles of fashion. I mean, this is ridiculous. Are we getting are we enjoying fashion more? Are we having more fun with it? No. Because we're now feeling more competition to share on Instagram, to keep up, to be the influencer. For what? I mean, honestly, I question, I see this as an opportunity to feel more empowered.
I think you're right, it is a little bit about taking power back. Because when you look at the psychology, it's difficult to see who's driving this. Are we driving this because we want to shop every week and we want to see something new every week? Or is somebody else or a bigger force driving that and making us feel like we're missing out if we're not going every week? Now, I find it interesting to think back to when I was younger, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, and remembering that you had to wait for new things to come out in, my favorite store. It was Glassons. It was kind of, I guess, like a bit of a top shop, I suppose, when I was 15. And having to wait until new stock came out, and then it was exciting, rather than constantly having that being put in front of you. So it is interesting when we talk about psychology to think about where the pushes and pulls are, and just assess that for yourself. Because I think we take it for granted that we make our own decisions, but actually marketing is extraordinarily powerful.
It seeps in even when we're not looking. It's kind of everywhere. And like you say, here's the chance to step back and go, hang on, what's driving what? Where's the chicken? Where's the egg? And what came first? And I think we're so enmeshed at this stage in time that it really is, rather than going back, perhaps we go forward from a point of understanding of empowerment and taking clothes back and taking fashion back and taking messaging back and letting people know that they should be them, not some marketing campaign that's telling them who they should be. And
something that Christina said actually at a talk, God, it must have been 2 years ago now, but I remember, and it links in as well to this idea of looking through your wardrobe and discovering what you have. So there's two things. First, we always say the most sustainable item you can wear is one that you already have. But the second thing that Christina said that I really loved is that no matter what you look like on the outside, if you're wearing sustainable fashion, or if you're wearing something that aligns with your values, maybe it's something you've owned for a long time or something you thrifted, you feel like an activist on the inside. So it's that empowerment of knowing that what you're wearing supports your worldview, supports your beliefs.
Absolutely.
And so the billboard on the outside, what it looks like doesn't really matter. It's that fighter on the inside.
And it's exciting,
really cool.
because it really is like, I'm doing this my way. I'm telling the world what I want to look like, the messaging I want to give. And there's no brand that's going to own that energy. And I think that's fantastic. Just to wrap up soon, I have, what is your favorite part of Fashion Revolution Week? What aspect within all the different topics they talk about, what excites you the most about this campaign, this week, this movement?
I think for me it's connecting all the dots, because I've spoken to a lot of designers and brands, and everyone was just like, okay, we really support it, and it's just getting the people together. This energy, I think, is most rewarding.
Yeah, I think for me as well, it's the connection, but a global connection.
Yes,
I think
absolutely,
it's
as
really,
well.
really cool that we know that this week, all around the world, people are asking these same questions. These questions that we often don't stop to think about. Who made my clothes? What's in my clothes? We're all around the world this week.
Yeah.
In places as obscure as Mauritius. People are asking these questions all together. That's really cool.
Absolutely. And what advice would
hope,
you give people out there for this week? Would you like them to...
Can you
what
please...
action?
You can all take this photo with this...
Is it in front of us?
Yes. Who made my clothes? Give this kind of pressure to brands to explore their own... What do you call it? Because a lot of brands actually don't know what factories they are using. So
To
really
be open
question
to be
about
more,
supply
yeah.
chain.
So fighting for a more transparent fashion system.
So what are the
through
steps?
this,
You upload an image of yourself with a garment and you ask the hashtag.
hashtag who made my clothes. You can tag Fashion Revolution, the global one, and Fashrev Hong Kong as well.
And then also tag the brand or include the brand in that
Yes.
question. So make sure that they are receiving
You
that
can even
message.
send an email personally to them to
Correct.
ask the questions you have.
Yeah,
So,
there are a lot of different ways you can send messages, letters to the people in the company. You can make public campaigns.
Absolutely.
You can question a whole bunch. And the tools are all there, right?
Yeah, and if anyone is interested, the 2020 Fashion Transparency Index is just out, so you can always go on Fashion Revolution website to see that.
What do you have to add to? Do you have any particular tips or advice in this campaign that
For
you'd
this
like?
week?
Yeah.
So just adding to what Kay said, you can find that poster on the Fashion Revolution website. You can download it, and posting that on Instagram, Who Made My Clothes, is really important, both to kind of pressure brands into being more transparent about their supply chains, but also because it shows all of your friends and all of your networks that this is something that you care about. And it's just great to spread that word in amongst your network about the fact that actually it's important that we ask these questions and that we know how and where our clothes are made.
And also perhaps to celebrate brands who are getting it right and to call them out and to congratulate them and to say that you're doing this particular part. You might not be perfect, it's not about being perfect, but to also celebrate the victories, because I think without that optimism, without that enthusiasm, things can get a bit lost. So also to celebrate what is working. By the same token, and to also to realize and remember that this is not just a week, it's a movement. It's ongoing. Every day we get dressed. Every day we have these choices, and to join in and to get excited, because there's been no better time to do this than now. And feel free to ask us any questions, send us messages, let us know how we can answer any burning questions, or just offer support and celebrate whatever changes you're making and whatever successes you're seeing happening around you. It's been an absolute pleasure. I have learned so much. And let every day be Fashion Revolution.
Thanks,
Thank
Tanya.
you so much,
Thank
Tanya.
you.
And
Thank
thank
you,
you,
Eaton.
Kay. Yeah, thank you, Eaton Hotel, for having us. It's been a lot of fun.
It's been great.
Thank you.